Morning, everyone. Today we're going to start talking about the monitoring of subawards. This is a slightly longer presentation, so we'll move fairly quickly through the information, but we will send out the recording. That's why we're going to keep you muted throughout the presentation so that we can have a high quality recording. We will send you the recording, the PowerPoint that we're using today, and I've already sent you the subaward fiscal report, but I'll attach it again to this afternoon's follow-up email that will come from the cja.r3training@illinois.gov mailbox account. If you do still have folks that you'd like to receive the follow-up emails or be invited to the last couple trainings, we're almost done with the series, be sure to email the cja.r3training email address with the staff member name, their role in the grant, and their email. So we've got a full agenda today. We're going to talk about subaward performance reporting and creating and reviewing the subaward performance report. We'll also talk about fiscal reporting for subawards, as well as the subaward fiscal report review and dispersal process. So let's get started on the PPR. So the PPR, which you haven't been introduced to yet, we'll do that on November 7th when our friends on the research side of the R3 team will show you the PPR. But the purpose of the periodic performance report is to document your progress towards your program implementation. So it's going to document the work of the program. It's going to provide information on your successes and the barriers to implementation that you encounter during that implementation. But it also gauges the work of the program relative to the goals, objectives, and performance measures, which you're working on finalizing now with your grant specialist. And if it feels like they're kind of picking through it too much, please don't feel that way, because we really want to be honing in on solid goals, objectives, and performance measures for your grant, because that's what we're going to use to create the PPR, the periodic performance report, that you're going to be reporting every quarter to us. That's going to document your progress in implementing the program and your progress toward meeting the benchmarks that you're setting in those goals, objectives, and performance measures. So that's a really key piece of the execution process right now, because it sets you up for your reporting throughout the life of the program. So similarly, the purpose of the subaward performance report is to reach those same objectives for you, for your subaward partners. So you're going to be creating these subaward performance reports so that you can document the work of any subaward partners that are going to be funded through the program. And I think we used this language during the initial overview session that we did way back when we started this training series. But when you have a subaward, you're kind of assuming a lot of the oversight responsibilities for your subaward partners that actually mirror the work that your grant specialists do for oversight for your grant program. So you're going to be partnering with these collaborative agencies to build and implement your larger program. They're taking on a piece of the program that's being implemented. So you're going to be collecting, reviewing, and approving subaward performance reports from those partner agencies. And you're not just going to be filing those away, you're going to be assessing your program partners' progress toward making their goals, objectives, and performance measures that they're going to be reporting every quarter. And you're going to be assuring that your subrecipients, your subaward partners, conform to the activities described in the subaward. So those are the big pieces that you're taking on when you have subaward partners. So you're going to be using these reports to identify any issues, any programmatic issues or administrative technical issues that your subaward partners are encountering. You're going to be gathering the data and especially the narrative information that you're going to be including in your PPR, in your report to us. And your work on collecting and reviewing and working with your subaward partners on their reporting is actually going to be a measure of your oversight responsibilities. So you'll see if you have subawards in your grant that there will be additional questions that you're going to be answering in your PPR relative to your oversight of your subaward partners. I don't think we'll stop here. We'll stop in the next section, Megan. So we've established a subaward reporting timeline for you. So your subaward performance reports will be due to you within 10 days of the end of the reporting period. Now, remember that we always ask for quarterly performance reports, so you'll be sending those to us within 15 days after the end of the reporting period. So we suggest this 10-day sort of lag period after the end of the performance, the period that's being reported. So that gives your subaward partners 10 days to gather all this information, put it in the report, and get it to you so that you can still meet the deadline that we set for the PPR that you're going to be reporting to us. That's going to include the performance of your subaward partners. So as I said, it's a quarterly schedule. So because we're not starting on a calendar quarter, we're going to have 5 quarterly reports. So the first subaward performance report, just like your PPR is due on the 15th of the month, your subaward reports will be due for November and December will be due January 10th of 2025. And then we'll get back on the calendar quarter, and that brings us back to a single month report for the 5th quarter, which will be next October. And that report will be due to you on November 10th. There'll also be a closeout report. You'll have a closeout PPR report that's due to us on November 30th of next year. And that's just a summary of all of that report, of all that performance throughout the whole 12-month period. So similarly, your subaward partners will have a closeout report that will be due to you 5 days earlier, November 25th of next year. Here's the example I just went through. Now, the reporting of your performance data is really important because the same way that you're going to be aggregating, you're going to be adding in the performance of your subaward partners to the PPR that you submit to us. We are often asked to aggregate our program performance of our grantees across all of the grants, all 88 that are starting in this cohort. So we report that performance to the Authority Budget Committee. That's the body of the authority that actually makes the designations of our awards. We may actually report that to the Authority Board, which oversees the operations of our whole agency. In addition, R3 has its own separate board, and so that's the body that makes decisions on how we use the R3 funds. And they're going to be the ones that make decisions about, future NOFOs and future program areas. So we often have to report to the R3 board on the progress of the different cohorts of R3 grants. And we can also be asked to report this information to the Illinois General Assembly. As you may know, every year when they're developing the state budget, every state agency has to go down to Springfield for hearings. And at that time, the different representatives and senators in the state can ask specific questions about the operation of our agency and the grants that we support. And so we also have to kind of aggregate that information so we're ready to answer those questions. So the timeliness of your reporting is really important so we can accurately reflect all the good work that our grantee agencies are doing with their R3 funding. In addition, we often get requests through the Freedom of Information Act. And so the more timely you are in reporting your performance, that helps us be able to more fully respond to the FOIA requests that we receive. And those have really strict reporting guidelines. Like I think we only get 5 days to respond to FOIA. So we really encourage you to be timely in your responses. One other note on the subaward performance reporting is that you can, we'll stop here for a second, but you can create awards, rather report templates that you require to be submitted more often than quarterly, right? So that you are collecting that information on a regular basis. So you're not just waiting for that quarter to end to get that information from your grantees. It's at your discretion to require your subaward performance reporting from your subawards on a more frequent basis. So we'll stop here for questions. Megan, is anything in the chat?
No questions yet.
Okay, let's talk about creating the subaward performance reports. So while we create the PPR based on your goals, objectives, and performance measures, and they're unique, so we can't give you the PPR until we have a signed agreement with you, because that's when we'll have the final goals, objectives, and performance measures, right? And since the PPR is specially created for each individual award, that's when we'll be able to create that. Similarly, until you have like finalized or to your satisfaction, the goals, objectives, and performance measures for your subawards, that's when you're going to be creating those subaward performance reports. But we don't, because of particularly because of the wide range of programs that we have in R3, that's why we have these customized reports for your PPR. But we can't take on the responsibility of creating subaward reports for the wide range of subaward partners that we're supporting through R3. So it's the responsibility of the grantee that has subawards to develop their performance report for each of their subaward partners. And that subaward report should be tailored to the unique goals, objectives, and performance measures of each subaward. So I've said that the subaward performance report, like our PPR, collects the performance metrics that are outlined in the goals, objectives, and performance measures, but that's like the minimum standard. If there are other factors that you want to collect, that's at your discretion. So, I mean, obviously you don't want to make it so onerous for your subaward partners that it's like an unachievable goal to get this report into you by the deadline. But you want to, it's your discretion to collect the information that is meaningful to you, that reflects the performance of your subaward partners, but it minimally should collect the information in those performance metrics that are outlined in the subaward goals, objectives, and performance measures. Now, you'll see when you get your PPR, and I think I've mentioned this elsewhere, that we always include narrative questions in our PPR, and we would like you to include those same narrative questions in the subaward performance reports as well, because that narrative information gives context to the numbers. No matter how good a job we do in counting things, sometimes we really need a good explanation of what those numbers reflect. What do they really mean? So those narrative questions can help to more fully describe the impact of the program. The example that I always use, and forgive me if you've heard this from me before, the first grant that I had when I came to the authority was this big multi-million-dollar drug prosecution program in Cook County. And I very eagerly, as a brand new grant specialist, got my very first data report. They had all sorts of tables and charts, right? And there was exactly one table that had one box that was filled with the numeral 1. And I was like, outright, what's all of our funding going for? Just this one numeral 1. So I actually called up the prosecutor who was the head of the program and asked them why all these other boxes weren't completed. And he was like, well, let me tell you what that numeral 1 represented. The 1 was this one offender who was this major drug kingpin who had been, really wreaking havoc on this neighborhood for a long time, and getting this significant sentence, this conviction of this one person, was a huge achievement. So what that told me is that we weren't collecting the right information, and that's when I really became convinced the value of the narrative information to flesh out what that numeral 1 actually meant. It meant this program was doing a fabulous job, had really, achieved something during this performance period. So I always ask for narrative information that helps me understand what those numbers mean. So we want questions in your subaward performance report that gives your subaward partners the opportunity to tell you about the successes that they have, but also gives them the opportunity to tell you about barriers to implementation that they've encountered as well. These grant agreements are really everybody's best guess of how we'll move forward and what we'll achieve. And we know, especially recent, the last couple of years when nobody saw COVID coming, and the impact that had on the implementation of programs that we, were already funding. Hopefully we won't have anything like that in this year's grant, but sometimes there are barriers to implementation that come up. And we want the door to be open for your subaward partners to tell you about those speed bumps that they're encountering, but then to also tell you what strategies they've come up with to get over those speed bumps and to, strengthen the implementation of the program. And that's where really the meat of that performance report comes in, where they help you to understand what those numbers mean and really give you the context for the implementation of the program. So since we're not dictating the subaward performance report, we're also not dictating the format, whatever program that you use to collect this information. I would suggest, just after long years of experience, that you think through like the format that you're going to use, because especially if you have more than one subaward partner, you want to make sure that you're getting the information in a way that you can easily sort of aggregate it and incorporate it into your report. So especially using a tool that will count things for you, that would seem to be an opportunity for you to have sort of a seamless way of collecting this information and making sure that you're reporting it in a timely fashion. And to also think of a format that helps you assess that data relative to their benchmarks. So if you can come up with something that will tell you what the expected performance is, and then here's what the performance was, that will be like an easy way for you to kind of be able to get clued into areas that need some attention. So we'll stop here, Megan. Any questions?
Nope, no.
Wow, great. So once you receive these subaward performance reports, what are you going to be looking at? Obviously, you're going to be asking if the report is complete. Is your partner making the expected progress? That's why I said, if you have the format that you pick, can easily show you what the expected performance is relative and to the actual performance. You want to see if they're making progress toward their objectives. You want to make sure that they are taking the time to tell you about their successes, those barriers, and those strategies as well. And one thing you'll see that when we do the PPR training in a couple of weeks, we're not asking folks to, when they complete the narrative, we're not asking our grantees to write the great American novel every quarter, but it's really kind of an opportunity for the grantee and for the subaward partner every quarter to kind of look at their numbers and to reflect on those numbers, and to tell you what they have been able to achieve, and to write a little something that will reflect the barriers and what new strategies they've come up with during that quarter. So it's a nice opportunity for grantees and for subaward partners to have that time to kind of take a step back and look at their data. The quick story I'll tell you on that one is, when I was doing these drug prosecution programs in the beginning, I used to go out to, on site visits. I would sometimes have the opportunity to kind of graph the data that was being reported. And I remember going to this one drug prosecutor, and he was like, he never filled in the narrative ever. And I asked him about it. I was like, how come you never, fill in these boxes for me and tell me about what's going on? He was like, what we do is the same thing every day. We arrest bad guys. And I was like, okay, well, I was looking at your data and I had graphed, one of the elements that he had reported. And I was like, I just don't know what this big spike is here. And then something really fell off here. Tell me about it. And he's like, oh, didn't I tell you? So when we did this spike, this is what happened here. And I was like, see, that's the kind of stuff that I want you to tell me about. Tell me about what that spike is. What happened there? Was that a good thing or was that a bad thing? So that's the kind of sort of concise narrative that we're looking for to help reflect on the numbers. Not that we're saying that you have to, graph all of this data. That'd be super cool if you can do it easily enough. But it's that opportunity to kind of reflect on the data that they are reporting, that you are reporting, and to tell us what's going on. And after that site visit, that prosecutor was really good about kind of telling me what those numbers meant every month. And I learned a lot more about his program and saw all the good things that he was doing. So when you are reviewing that, the performance reports you get from your PPR, from your subaward partners, I should say, the same way that we will reach back out to you when we receive your PPR. If we have any questions, we're going to be reaching out to you with those questions. So we want you to also be reaching out to your subaward partner for clarification if you have any questions on it, or if they didn't fill out the form correctly or fully, to have them revise that subaward performance report. And once you're satisfied with the report, you're going to approve it and keep it on file. Now, you are not required to send those subaward performance reports along with your PPR. That's something that you'll retain. And those subaward performance reports are not approved by the authority. They're approved by you, the grantee. So you need to retain these subaward performance reports on file, because if for no other reason that when we come out and do a a site visit, you'll be able to show us how you collect the information that goes into your PPR, right? But your subaward partner also has to retain those performance reports on file as well, because you're going to be doing site visits with them. And next Wednesday, I'll walk you through the subaward site visit process. So they need to retain those reports as well. Any questions in the chat before we dive into fiscal reporting, Megan?
There is a clarification question. We are able to edit our PPR to add things like graphs, or only the sub-award PPR?
I don't believe that the PPR has that facility, but if you have, if you have the ability to make graphs and cool stuff like that, then you can certainly email that to your specialist as a supplement. But the PPR is actually created in a survey tool in Qualtrics. So I don't believe that there is any way to attach anything to that. It's really just a matter of answering the questions in the PPR survey tool. So, but yeah, if you've got cool stuff like graphs that you think are helpful to demonstrate the work of your program, you can send that separately as an email to your grant specialist. And that would be really interesting to see. Any other questions?
Nope, that's the only one.
Great. All right, here we go with fiscal reporting. So as we've said before, these, our subboards are right. So you're partnering with your collaborative agencies to collect, review, and approve subaward fiscal reports that you're going to receive from your partner agencies. You're going to be taking on the responsibility of assuring that those expenditures conform to GATA guidelines, that they're spending their money on allowable costs only. You're going to be taking on the responsibility of dispersing grant funds to your subaward partners and to make sure that your subaward partners are maintaining good records, both for the site visits you're going to do with them, if we come along on a site visit, and when they're audited as well. So if you have subawards, you will be asked to develop and implement written policies detailing the fiscal reporting processes and tools, and a policy requiring that the subrecipient report staff time and effort spent on the grant program, as well as a stop pay policy as well. So those policies kind of they mirror the requirements that we have for you, right? So you're going to have your subaward partners do the same kind of staff time and effort reporting, the timekeeping that we ran through a couple of weeks ago. So, that's the thing with government money, is that all of these requirements start on top and they all filter down to all levels. So, especially like with federal awards, we get these requirements from the Fed. So we have to meet those. So our grantees meet them, and any subawards from our grantees meet them as well. So all of those requirements filter down to all levels of the funding. They just follow the money, basically. So the subaward fiscal report is going to be used by your subrecipients to request funds, and it's going to be the backup documentation that you're going to have for the dispersals to those subrecipients. Remember, all expenditures under your grant have to have some backup documentation, whether it's paying for the office supplies and you have an invoice for that, or timesheets for your staff, and now for dispersals to your subaward partners, their fiscal report is going to be the backup documentation for dispersals to your subaward partners. And then you're also going to be using these subaward fiscal reports and other program expenses to create your PFR, your periodic financial report, that you're going to be sending to us. And that will be the tool that we use as backup, because we have to have backup documentation for our expenses as well. We use your PFR as the backup documentation for the dispersals that we make to you. So now we've sent you before, and I'll send it again this afternoon. We have a sample subaward fiscal report form that you may use. You may elect to use, but if you have something else that meets the same standards, then you're free to use that as the subaward fiscal report. But I will send you that standard, that template rather, and we'll go use that to go through the subaward reporting in just a few seconds. So here are the standards for whatever fiscal report you use for your subaward expenditures. It has to reflect the total budgeted amount in each budget category. It must report the expenditures in each budget category. It must reflect the grant funds that have been received and reflect the balance of unspent funds in each budget category. So just like the performance reporting, we're going to ask you to collect those reports from your subaward partners 5 days before your reports are due to the authority. So most of our grants report on a monthly basis. And so I've got a little calendar here, maybe hard to see, but since we do monthly reporting, your November report is going to be due, the subaward report will be due December 10th, because your PFR for November will be due to us on December 15th. Any questions in the chat, Meg, before we dive into the nitty-gritty of it?
Nope, no.
Great. All right, let's talk about the different dispersal methods. Remember, there are 3 dispersal methods that are allowable under R3: reimbursement, advance pay, and working capital advance. And you may be in the process of figuring out which method that you're going to use for your grant. Remember, the default is reimbursement. That's the most preferred method. But if you are seeking either advance pay or working capital advance, you're going to go through this assessment by our outside contractor, who will collect information from you, and they will let us know if you are qualified for advance pay or for working capital advance. This is important. Only those grantees who have been approved for advance pay may offer advance pay to their subrecipients. Because remember, advance pay is where we have, if you're approved for advance pay, that outside contractor has told us that you have the adequate systems, the administrative and financial capacity to properly account for this funding stream as opposed to all the rest of yours, and to segregate those funds. And so if you are approved for advance pay, you may elect to offer advance pay to your grantees, to your subaward partners, I should say. But let's start again. We've talked before when we looked at the PFR about what a cash budget is, and the template for the subaward fiscal report that we're going to offer you that you may elect to use does include a cash budget. So if you are offering either advance pay or working capital advance to your subaward partners, then you would ask them to fill out the cash budget. And remember, that's where your the agency is going to plot their expected expenses month by month by month. And I'll show it to you again in just a few seconds. But that's where they will be, kind of figuring out when their expenses will be incurred by budget category each month in the 12-month period performance. And just to review, remember under the reimbursement dispersal method, there's no advance dispersal. And so your subrecipients will just be paying their grant expenses, and they're going to be reporting them on their fiscal report and requesting reimbursement from you for those costs. And then you're going to use that fiscal report as the backup documentation for the dispersal that you're going to make. Now, with the reimbursement method, you have the discretion to decide whether you're going to ask for backup documentation from your subaward partners on any of these dispersal methods. So you get to decide if you want to have them send you invoices and timesheets, and not timesheets, but payroll records and all the backup documentation for the expenses that they are reporting on the aggregating the PFR. That's your discretion. But at some point, they're going to have to maintain those records. They're going to have to provide them to you whenever you ask for them. And you should be definitely requesting them, or at least examining them at a site visit within the first 6 months of that subaward agreements activity. Now, reimbursement doesn't strictly require the submission of a cash budget, but it can be a helpful tool both for your subaward partner to plan out when their expenses are going to be, because they're going to have to come up with the cash to pay those bills that they're going to be incurring under this subaward. So that helps them with their cash flow management. It can be a useful tool for you to make sure that their planning is kind of in line what you expect them to perform throughout the life of the subaward. And it can help your subaward partners kind of keep track of their expected expenditures versus their actual expenditure throughout the life of the grant. And as I said, the sample report that we're going to send you does include a cash budget tab. I'm not going to bring this up. I think, okay, I'll bring it up now. Sorry. Let me stop right then. And while I'm bringing up the fiscal report, Megan, are there any questions so far?
Nope, still no.
Okay. Now, I know this is going to be difficult to see because it's a lot of small type, but as I said, I'll send you the sample. So this is it's a very simple Excel file. It's not as complicated as the PFR at all. I don't have any fancy macros and stuff in this one. It's really pretty straightforward. But as you can see, it kind of does follow the same logic. So here's the approved budget. And this is going to be where your subaward partners are going to be plotting out what they expect to incur every month of the report of the period of performance. And as you can see, I've kind of filled in a sample here. So we're going to have some, we're going to, oops, didn't add up, sorry. I will before I send it out. I'll make sure I have those totals in there. But we expect $20,000 worth of salary every month of the grant and $10,000 worth of fringe benefits. And that should total, sorry. I'm going to have to clean this up before I send it out to you. Sorry about that. Where it didn't add. I'll fix it. And we're going to have some travel every month of the grant. We're not going to buy equipment on this grant. There's going to be some significant initial supplies, but after that, it's going to go down to like a regular monthly amount. Here's contractual services, $1,000 a month. Occupancy is going to be $500 in rent. Telecommunications are $200. There's our total. So this is how you're going to use this cash budget to kind of plot out those expenses that are expected month by month. Now I'm going to stop here for a sec. Go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so just review, advance pay allows for an initial dispersal of that first month's expected expenses. That's why the cash budget is important for advance pay. And then subsequent dispersals will advance the expected expenses for the next 30 days, less or plus any cash balance that they have, right? So again, dispersals are made using the subaward fiscal report. Like I said, a cash budget is highly recommended. That'll help you understand where you are with the projected costs and help your grantee, your subaward partner rather, understand where they are relative to their expected costs. It's going to report the subaward expenses that have been paid and include the projected subaward amount expenses for the next month. And then the subsequent dispersals will be the projected expenses minus any cash balance. Now, where we're going to have our consultant do an assessment of our grantees' fiscal and administrative capacity to qualify for advance pay or for working capital advance. Our consultants are not going to be performing assessments like that for the subaward partners. So you're taking on that responsibility. of figuring out if that subaward partner in your assessment has the capacity to properly manage these funds that you're going to be advancing to them, and to make sure that they're properly accounted for out of all of the funds that they receive. Can they appropriately keep track of the funds that you are advancing to them? So they shouldn't be using any advance that you send them for this grant, for this subaward. They shouldn't be using that for expenses that are not related to this subaward. So it's not like any advanced funds will go into a general pool that they can pay their agency expenses out of. This advance that you're going to offer to your subaward partners should only be used to pay for subaward expenses. So that responsibility falls to you to determine if they have those proper controls in place to account properly for the advanced funds. So, this is the language from GATA about, about the qualifications for advance pay. It's really going to be up to you to determine the factors that you're going to look at and make that assessment in order to make the decision whether you're going to advance funds to your grantees or your subaward partners or not. A couple of weeks ago, we had a lot of questions about like the timing of the reports. And, one of the questions that we had was like, well, if the report is submitted to us on the 10th, we're not actually going to be reporting a dispersal because we're going to use that PFR or the subaward template rather to be dispersing funds to our subaward partner, but that's going to be not during the reporting period. And that's true. So that might be a situation where you make the decision that an advance pay might be appropriate for that subaward partner, so that you can give them that bite of cash for their expected month one expenses. You can give that to them up front. That will be during that first reporting period. That dispersal will be made in November. And so when you get your November subaward fiscal report from them, you will be able to reflect that you sent them money because you've advanced that money to them. And then it'll be reporting their expenses against that advance. So we'll go through that in just a second. But timeliness and accuracy, the same way it's critical to make the advance pay work for grantees, it's doubly true for subawards that are receiving advances as well. So because the advances for the next month's grant expenses, and it's not even going to be submitted till after the 10th, you're going to be reporting your expenses to us on the 15th. And then it'll take a little while for us to get that dispersal to you from the comptroller's office. If there are delays in either the submission of those subaward fiscal reports, or there are inaccuracies, there are errors in that subaward fiscal report, then that's going to delay you submitting your reports to us. It's going to further delay us dispersing funds to you, and everybody's going to be waiting by the mailbox for their check then. So if you do offer advance pay to your subaward partners, I would encourage you to really emphasize how important that accuracy and the timeliness of their reporting is. And by the way, the 10th is like the deadline to turn that in. They can certainly, if they have the ability, turn that in more quickly to you before the 10th, so that you have a better shot at making sure that you get a chance to review those reports, make sure that they're accurate, make any corrections that are necessary so you can get your report into us on time. Before we go to working capital, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to kind of bring up that fiscal report again and show how you would use it. Try to make this a little bigger for you. That's a little better. So, as I said, well, I have the totals, the budget category totals here. So if this for an advance pay, if you've gone to that cash budget, we'll go over to cash budget, and you see, I'll have to write this in. Hang on 1 second for me. There you go. That you're going to offer advance pay to your subaward partner. They've completed this cash budget for you, and you're satisfied that this is appropriate, that their first month's expenses are going to be $32,300. You're getting advance pay from us. You've gotten that first check. Now you can advance a share of those funds to your subaward partner using that cash budget in this PFR as your backup documentation for that initial dispersal. So you've sent them $32,300. So when you get their subaward fiscal report from the first month, $32,300 is the amount that they've received. Their expenses for month one total $12,225. Something big must not have happened. So they have a cash balance of $20,000. Then you're not, I guess, you know what? It didn't go through. Something's missing here. Hang on, sorry. That didn't come out correctly. But I'll fix the total. Sorry about that. Anyway, so if you have a cash balance here, your grantee didn't expend as much as they expected and that you based your advance on. So if they have a cash balance, you're going to subtract that cash balance from what they project that they're going to need the next month. So they only project that they'll need $12,000 next month. You're going to subtract that from the amount that they actually have on hand. And in this example, you don't need to send them a dispersal at all because they have more than enough money on hand. If they spend more than they expected, maybe the supplies came in at a higher than their estimate, and so they're a little bit in the hole. You're going to give them what they're in the hole plus what they expect for the next month. And I'll clean up my example. I apologize that my math isn't working here, and I'll send you a stronger example in the follow-up today. I'll send you a clean template and then one with the examples on it. But basically, for the advance pay, you're going to be sending them what they project they need for the next month, less any cash balance that they have on hand, or plus any negative cash balance that they have. So let's go back.
You do have a couple questions, Maureen.
Oh, good.
The first question is, how long should we anticipate waiting for reimbursement of expenses?
So we talked about this in the PFR training a little bit. So that first dispersal is going to take a little while longer because when we actually enter into a grant agreement, we actually file that agreement with the comptroller's office. And when they get that agreement, they actually, what they call it is a contract obligation document. The way I think of it is they are actually kind of establishing a checking account at the comptroller's office for this grant. And it is for this state fiscal year. So we're going to put in this account for this state fiscal year the funds that we think we'll need to disperse to your agency during the state fiscal year, which remember goes July through June. And so that can take about 2 weeks to establish that COD. And then after that checking account is open and we send them requests for dispersals using your PFR as the backup documentation, then you should probably allow about 2 weeks for those dispersals. So that initial dispersal is going to be slower. You can speed it, you can make it go a little faster if you are signed up for direct deposit with the comptroller's office, but the wheels still have to turn. That COD still needs to be established. They need about 2 weeks to do that. And then dispersals take about 2 weeks after that checking account is open. So that first dispersal is slower, but after we get going, then it takes about 2 weeks for those dispersals to happen. Because remember, when we get your PFR, your grant specialist is going to review it. And if they think it's perfect, then they're going to approve it. They're going to send it to their manager for review and approval. If they think it's perfect, then they're going to send the request for dispersal to our fiscal office. And they're going to go into they actually physically go into the comptroller's system to make that dispersal, and then the comptroller's office has to make it happen. So actually, if you think about it, 2 weeks from the receipt of a PFR to, the dispersal happening is actually pretty quick, considering there's going to be 4 different, individuals that's going to touch it: your specialist, the manager, our fiscal office, and the comptroller's office. So 2 weeks is a pretty good estimation. That's why I always talk about the timeliness and accuracy, because if your specialist has to go back to you for corrections or revisions, that's going to add some time, right? So it's going to be 2 weeks from the time that your specialist thinks it's perfect, the manager thinks it's perfect, fiscal doesn't have any issues with it, and we go to the comptroller's office. Question?
You have one more. It's from Carol. Correct me if I'm reading this wrong, but I think Carol's question is, what should the subcontractors put in as their monthly expenses? What are considered as expenses?
So the subawards will include a detailed budget using the same template that you use for your grant, that same budget template. Your subawards are going to use that same template. And so they're going to have line item budgets for each tab of the budget categories. And so the fiscal reports will be reporting their expenses by those budget categories, the same way you are. And you have some responsibility for oversight. If you see that they're reporting something either way larger than what the budgeted amount is or what it should be for that period, or if they're reporting expenses in a budget category that they don't have budget, dollars budgeted to, that's a problem. So you're going to be, reviewing this to make sure that that budget looks like what you expect. That's why I love the cash budget, because that's like a picture of what you expect that subaward partner's expenses to be every month, right? And it's based on what their budget is. So they should be reporting what are the budget, their expenses according to that line item budget that you have in their subaward agreement. Does that help? And that's also another reason why, especially if you're working with a subaward partner that you haven't had this kind of relationship with before, where they're reporting expenses to you, or maybe even if because you're new in this, you may want to, go out and take a look at their records, look at that backup documentation, maybe earlier in the grant, not wait to do a review at 6 months, but, kind of get you both off on the right foot for this grant. And so when they send in their first subaward fiscal report, just say, would you send along your backup documentation for that? So that's when you're going to want to see if there's personnel, you want to see, their records for the the salary and fringe benefits that they've paid. If they bought supplies, you're going to see those invoices. You want to see those bills. You know, you want to see the utility bills that they're paying because of this grant. So you want to take a look at that backup documentation and make sure that they are only they're only charging you for grant expenses that are approved in the grant. Any more, Megan?
Carol, should they disregard the second?
So, I'm sorry?
Is
there a question there?
We'll ask for clarification and we'll follow up. You can,
Okay, we'll have another chance for questions before we stop. So now on to working capital advance. Now you'll recall that that allows for an initial dispersal of projected subaward expenses for that initial period of 2 months of operating expenses plus any startup costs. So if your subaward partner has to buy some laptops, has to buy a desk and has to buy a chair and things like that, and that should be detailed in their cash budget. It should be detailed in the budget in the subaward agreement. And you're going to be giving them this nest egg of funds so that they can start their subaward program. And you're going to give them 2 months worth of operating expenses as well. This is at your discretion, remember. And so you have to be making an assessment of your subaward partner of whether you think that they have the financial and administrative capacity to really properly, account for these funds that you're going to be advancing them. So this is going to be even a bigger advance probably than if you're using the advance pay method. So you're taking a little bit more of a risk, both of you are, because, quite frankly, for any of these dispersal methods to subaward partners, if they're audited and they did not appropriately spend the subaward funds, then they're going to have to pay you back for that because you're going to have to pay us back for it. Because, like I said before, all of these rules go from all of the different levels, from the federal government or the state to us, to our grantees, to our subaward partners. All those rules apply all the way down. And if it make you guys feel any better, we get audited too. And the auditors look at all of our procedures, all of our processes, look at all of our backup documentation. So even those audit requirements follow all of those same levels. So, and at all of those levels, none of the funds can be spent outside of the approved budgeted uses, right? Outside the cost allowability, outside what's specified in the grant agreement or in the subaward grant agreement. So they can only be spending on those expenses that are detailed in their budget within the subaward. The same way that you can only spend within what's detailed in the budget that's in your grant agreement. The same way that we can only spend, within the same parameter, what's in our budget when we send one to the federal government for criminal justice or victim services funding. We get audited for that too, to make sure that that federal money that they're sending us we only spent it the way that it was detailed in our budget. So that initial dispersal is really, now this is when you really want to have that cash budget, because you really want to make sure that the amount that you're dispersing to them is for those startup costs and just the 2 months of operating funds. Because the folks the entities that receive working capital advance are really saying that I don't have the cash flow to, to pay for payroll. I can't pay the electric bill and put the lights on unless you send me that money first, because I don't have the cash flow to do that. I don't have, any agency funds. Like reimbursement grantees are basically paying those expenses out of their agency funds and paying their agency funds back with the grant funds. So the working capital advance agencies don't have that ability. They can't turn the lights on or pay staff without having this advance from you that you get from us. So that initial dispersal is based on the cash budget, and the subsequent dispersals reimburse them for actual expenditures month to month, but they should all be keeping within just having that nest egg of the 2 months of operating funds. So after that initial dispersal, they should be, expensing all of those. They should be incurring those costs for all those startup. They bought the laptops, they bought the desk, they bought the chair. All of those setup costs are done. That should be reflected on their first fiscal report. And so now they should just be holding 2 months worth of operating expenses at any time. And if they've got too much of that cash on hand, that's going to be reported, reflected in your fiscal report. And now you're going to look like you're holding too much cash on hand. So you're taking on the responsibility of making sure that those working capital advance grantees aren't sitting on too much cash. Because if they are, then it looks like you're sitting on too much cash, and we're going to ask for it back. So under working capital advance, just like we do with our grantees, we want to get as close to zero by the end of the grant, so that last quarter, that 2 months worth of nest egg is going to start getting spent down. So we're not going to fully reimburse in month 10. We're going to say, okay, we'll give you about half of what your expenses were, so that now you're only sitting on 1.5 times operating expense. And next month, we're going to be making it a little bit less, so that you get to zero balance by the end. Now, obviously, it's not going to be absolute zero. There may be, a small amount that you will owe your subaward partners near the end, or they may owe you some, small change back at the end of the grant. But by decreasing these reimbursements during the last quarter, you're spending down that nest egg to get as close to zero as possible. And you're going to be making that determination. So remember, because we don't approve the subaward fiscal reports, you do. So some of the common errors that you'll see, these are the same ones that we find in PFRs, that the report may be missing the signatures of two different people, one preparing the report and the other approving it. Have they used the right month and year that they're reporting for? Are the cumulative expenses, do they match those reported for the previous month? Do they have some error in sort of transcription error from month to month? Are all of the expenditures in the budgeted categories? If they don't have money in the equipment line, are they reporting the expenses in the equipment line? Are the reported expenditures higher or lower than expected? That's where you're going to be going back to that cash budget and seeing where they may vary. And it may not be an error, or they may not have misspent, but it may just be that one of their expected expenditures came in higher or lower than they planned in the budget. And does the spending make sense relative to the reported program activity? If they say that they, are expending, a lot more than what they're actually, reporting as performance in their periodic performance report, you're going to have a question there. And then again, if they are sitting on too much cash, if there's too high a cash balance. So the same with the periodic performance report. And I know I've gone a little bit over, I apologize. You should be, asking them questions or asking for revisions in the PFR. You're going to be approving the report once you're satisfied with it and making the dispersal off of that report. You should have 2 people that are reviewing and approving that dispersal, right? Because that's our standard, is that there should be 2 signatures on every dispersal. And then your subaward dispersal should be reported on your PFR. And remember that the subaward fiscal reports are not approved by the authority. So tomorrow we're going to talk about budget revisions and amendments, and we're actually added a topic. We're going to talk a little bit about program income because we've seen a couple of grants that this probably will apply to. So that's tomorrow. And then next Wednesday, we'll talk in detail about the subaward site visit reports. I'll send you the link to the training survey. And now here's the chance for any last questions. Anything in the chat, Megan?
One last,
Okay.
if a budget expense comes in higher than projected, will we be required to request a modification to the budget, or is there a percentage allowance for overages?
Well, if an expense comes in a little bit higher than you expected, let's see, what could it be? I'm trying to think of something. Maybe you were buying 5 laptops for your subaward partner, and like the cost estimate was way low what it should be. You still want to reimburse them for that, but we'll talk a little bit about revisions to subaward budgets. We'll talk about that tomorrow, but your grant amount is not going to change. That's already been fixed. So if the Authority Budget Committee has approved $500,000 for your grant, and part of your grant is, 2 subawards, if you want to amend their subaward to give them more money, then you're going to have to find that in your budget, right? So your budget is fixed. Their budget is fixed once you have a subaward agreement that's signed, right? So if those expenses are higher and you want to give them more money, you're going to have to amend that subaward agreement, but you're also going to have to find the dough in your grant as well. So you would I would start with a budget revision for your grant to reallocate the funding in your grant to give them a higher amount. And then once that's in place, you would have to amend their agreement, because that's one of the terms of the agreement is the amount of it, right? So you would have to amend that subaward agreement to give them more money, and you would have to have a budget that allocates that higher budgeted amount. Any last questions, or shall we let people go after I've kept them 10 minutes too long?
I think we're good.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll go through the budget revisions and amendments in detail tomorrow. So thanks for joining us.